Hey fellow babies, welcome back to Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net, and if you are a Patreon patron, then we appreciate it. You could be watching this on Patreon as well. If you want to see Pachter Factor before it goes on to YouTube for free, because we're still going to make it available to everybody, you can sign up on Patreon. You can support SIFTD at a $2 a month level. I encourage you guys to do it. Shane is painfully close. If we get 500 people to sign up for $2 a month, he's covering expenses and he can buy himself a can of pork and beans every month. And so he might lose enough weight that he won't be able to actually get out of bed and come here and tape this thing. But as you can tell, I haven't shaved. He actually schleps all the way over to my house and does all this stuff, and it costs money to get this stuff edited and put up. So appreciate it if you can support. If not, understood, watch us on YouTube. At a minimum, please check out Patreon and please follow me on Twitter. That way you won't miss an episode of Pachter Factor. I'm on Twitter at Michael Pachter. Our first question this week is from Patreon, and I'm going to butcher this poor guy's name. Alan, or Alan with one L, Milic. I would say Milic, but it could be Milik. And he sounds like he's an Aussie, so he may have given up the Croatian spelling or pronunciation of Milic, and he may have gone to Milik. G'day, Michael. How's it going? According to some recent news, you've overused the word news here, it's probably not. Nintendo is set to ship Switch consoles to China, and as a result, forecasts have been adjusted from the already optimistic 80 million to 130 million lifetime sales. Can you explain the likelihood of Nintendo hitting those numbers? There isn't news. The news is that Tencent is putting Honor of Kings, which has another name, they're going to put that on the Switch. And I think that people interpreted Tencent putting a Chinese game on the Switch as some signal that the game could only be played in China. In fact, they're putting on the Switch and they're going to let people play it elsewhere. Switch cannot be sold in China until the Chinese regulators approve importation of the hardware, and that takes a long time. Microsoft got the Xbox 360 into China in like the 6th or 7th year after the console launched. As far as I know, the PS2 never got there, but maybe 10 years in. It takes a lot, and it's just the Chinese are protective. Even if the Switch got in there, there's a question how many people can actually afford it or would choose to afford it. Nintendo's got great IP, of course, and so some people would. But adding an incremental 50 million to the lifetime forecast for the Chinese market, that's a pretty big stretch. I mean, the Chinese market, there's about 400 million households. So, you're talking about, 12% of them buying the Switch. That's pretty high. I mean, it's likely that they'll do that kind of penetration in the US and in Europe, but it's highly unlikely to get that kind of penetration in China. As far as, the likelihood of Nintendo hitting those numbers, let's wait until supply and demand for Switch are in balance and we actually can figure out demand. And if you remember from Econ 101, and some of you I'm sure haven't taken economics, where supply and demand, when they're in balance, you clear production at the agreed price. So, where we have enough supply to satisfy the demand, the price for the Switch will be $300, and everybody who wants one will buy one at $300. Right now, the price on eBay is $400 or higher. So clearly supply doesn't catch up to demand, and so there's excess demand. Excess demand gets addressed by higher price. And I can't forecast overall demand because there is excess demand, and all I know is they're producing about 500,000 a month. They had their million plus at launch. Every month thereafter, April, May, June, July, August, the total sell-through is about 500,000 units. So Nintendo, I know, has increased production. They've said so. The Chinese fabricators, the suppliers have said so. We assume that they're making more than 1 million a month because Nintendo flat out said early on they're going to ship 10 million this fiscal year. And to get to 10 million, you have to make 833,000 a month. I was pretty confident they were making 1 million a month. They may be making 2 million a month right now. They're not shipping them. So until they start showing up to market and we see the price drop to 300 on eBay, you won't know whether demand is being satisfied. As soon as we have that, I'll be able to forecast how many units they sell. And my bias is the numbers between 50 and 75 million, not between 125 and 150. So when you ask how realistic those numbers are, we sold 100 million at 249 and lower. Switch is 300, and I think it's not the same type of device as Wii was. Grandma isn't going to play with the Switch in the rec room and have a Wii bowling night with all of her grandma friends. I mean, I just don't see that. I do think the software for Switch is compelling enough that you're going to get penetration in more console households. It could be a 100 million unit seller, but I'd really be surprised at 130. And again, I don't know what the number is until supply and demand are in balance. So come back to me in February or March. We should be in demand supply balance by then, and I'll come up with a forecast. My gut right now says 75 million is a safe number, with a bias that it could be lower if the price doesn't come down. I don't think it's going to sell 130 million units at $300 ever. Our next question from Patreon from Chris Ross. And Chris, thank you for your patronage. Hey Pac, with so many AAA games implementing loot boxes and microtransactions on full $60 releases, do you think there is a saturation point where the publishers will need to back off? Or do you see these types of transactions as part of the norm now? What do you see as the next iteration of in-game purchases in future big budget games? You know, it's interesting. We've had a migration from $60 and you had a complete game, which was the norm back in the middle part of last decade, to $60 and some DLC. And DLC was paid. So you had, initially DLC was $15, then it went to 20. You used to get 1 or 2 DLC packs per game, and they would do it 6 months after the game came out. And then Take-Two, of all people, figured out maybe if we do DLC like a month after the game comes out, we'll capture a bigger piece of the audience. And they pioneered that. Now everybody's doing it. So you get DLC a month or 2 months after the game launches, and you're up to as many as 4 paid DLC. So if you want to buy everything you could buy in Call of Duty 2010, or 11 or 12, you were paying $60 for the game and $80 for the 4 DLC packs. And Activision would cut you some slack, and they'd sell you the season pass for $50. You get, either $60 or $80 worth of DLC for $50 up front. And that was as much as they could extract from you. If you wanted everything you could buy in the game, you spent $110 and you got everything in the game. I think the publishers started looking at the Chinese free-to-play market and the mobile market, where everything is microtransaction, the games are free. So League of Legends is probably the best known Western, free-to-play game, Clash of Clans. And they said, oh, well, let's layer in some of that too. So Activision started doing it, probably back in 09 or 10, and we got a migration from only DLC to DLC plus microtransactions. A lot of guys resented that, but the fact was, if you bought the stuff in the game, you weren't capped out at $50. If you wanted to spend $300 or $400 customizing your character, you totally could. So the publishers realized quickly that if you remove the ceiling on the amount that big fat people like me, called whales, are willing to spend, big wealthy fat people like me, then you actually might make more money. And so it doesn't take very many whales spending $2,000 or $3,000 and buying everything in the game to more than offset, a few pissed off people not buying DLC. So then we went to that hybrid model. Now I think you're seeing a migration away from DLC at all and toward all microtransactions all the time. So that's the case with Overwatch, that's the case with Titanfall 2, that's the case with Halo 5. That'll be the case with Star Wars Battlefront 2. You're going to get microtransactions only. So I think that the logical extension, to answer your question is, maybe we get away from $60 altogether. And the reason I don't think we're going to get away from $60 altogether is games like FIFA. FIFA has been on a microtransactions only model for a long time, since 2010 with Ultimate Team. And although you buy card packs, but it's still microtransactions, and they're expensive. They haven't had DLC, because what are you going to offer as DLC in FIFA? But I asked EA a couple of years ago, why don't you just, because the EA model, the business model is, we sell, let's just make the math easy. We sell 10 million units or 20 million units of FIFA. Half of the people in FIFA play Ultimate Team, so 10 million people play Ultimate Team. More than half of those guys spend money, so let's just say 6 million people. And that number last year was $600 million, Ultimate Team revenue. So the average guy playing Ultimate Team spent $100. Now, I think, if you draw a bell curve to have the distribution of what people spend, the median, the mean, the average, and the middle guy is probably right about exactly 100. But there are tails. One tail is the guy who did it once, and he spent $250 or whatever you can buy a card pack for. The other tail is the guy who has to keep buying every card pack till he has every player, and he spends $3,000. So I said to EA once, why don't you guys just give every person who buys FIFA $60 in gold? You spend $60 on FIFA, $60 worth of gold to buy card packs in Ultimate Team, 50 euros, whatever you bought the thing for, 40 pounds. And they looked at me like I had three eyes. They go, why would we do that? I said, because the 10 million people who try Ultimate Team would jump to 20 million people. Because if you have $60 of free stuff in the game, of course you're going to check it out and try it. It's free. This is like giving the gambler, me, in Vegas, $60 to put in a slot machine. I'm going to play. And then when I lose your $60, I might put in another 10 or 20 of my own and keep chasing that because I feel like I'm about to get a jackpot. So I said you go from 10 million people playing to 20. You go from 6 million people paying to maybe 8 or 9 million. And if they averaged $100, you'd make 800 or 900 million. Even if the next 2 or 3 million people only spent $50, you make another $100 million. And they said, but what about the whales? And I go, what do you mean? Well, they'd spend $60 less. And I go, no, the guy who spends 500 would spend 560. Like, they don't understand. I play free-to-play games all the time. I actually know, you give me free shit, I'm going to spend it, and I'm going to spend my own money. So I think they're crazy. But the point is, the future is what I described. Make the cost of entry as close to zero as you can. That's League of Legends, right? You get the game for free. That's Clash of Clans. You get it for free. World of Tanks, you get it for free. And then encourage people to spend money. Can you imagine if FIFA was actually free? Instead of 20 million units, there would be 300 million people playing. I mean, obviously you need a console, but if it was PC, there's at least 1 billion PCs out there owned by at least 300 million soccer fans. Everybody would play it. So I think they would see 15 times as many people trying Ultimate Team, especially if they gave it to you free and gave you 50 or 60 bucks of gold. Give it a shot. If everybody starts on the same 60 bucks, the guys who want to win will spend more. So I think that's the future, but it will take years, if not decades, to convince Activision that they have to give up the 60 bucks per copy they get for Call of Duty, and to convince EA that they have to give up the 60 bucks per copy that they get for FIFA. Take a look at GTA Online. All microtransactions, no DLC, but you have to buy the game to play it. How much would Take-Two make if they made GTA Online free for everybody? I think they would instantly have 100 million more players because people will want to check it out. And you can keep those people from playing the single-player GTA experience. Just let them play online. The guys who are already in GTA Online that invested $1,000 a piece would welcome fresh meat that they can kick ass, and take all their stuff. So I think that's the future, but it's going to be probably a decade till we get there. And what you might see is, you might see games developed on a parallel track. One is the full-fledged experience with the single-player game, plus all sorts of multiplayer maps that you pay for, and the other would be a stripped-down multiplayer only, with encouraging you to spend more money in microtransactions. Our next question this week is from Twitter, from @Sala91. Looking at this upcoming holiday season, what gaming-related stocks would be good to buy right now? Well, I have to say, I give stock advice for a living, so I actually do it to clients who pay. And paying $2 a month on Patreon isn't enough. Sorry, I don't get paid for that. So I will be glad to tell you what my ratings are on each of the stocks, but you have to be, if you open an account at Wedbush, you can read my research. Every retail client can read my research. I have a buy rating on Activision. I have a buy rating on Electronic Arts. I have a buy rating on Ubisoft. I have a neutral rating on Nintendo. I have a neutral rating on Take-Two. So those are the 5 game publishers that I cover. Neutral means I'm not recommending it, nor am I telling you to sell it. Buy means I think that there's upside from here. I cover Zynga with a buy. I cover Glue Mobile with a neutral. So that's it for gaming stocks. And so the answer is I would buy Activision, EA, Ubisoft, and Zynga. But I'm not going to tell you why, because that's my day job. That's like asking a doctor who has to show for a diagnosis, and I'm sorry, I don't know if you're a responsible investor. You might do something silly with your money, and then if you lose it, I'd feel terrible. The truth is, the publishers are all in pretty good shape, including the ones I have neutral on. Back, 10, 15 years ago, there were 6 or 7 more of them. I mean, we've lost Acclaim, Midway, THQ, 3DO, Interplay. IDOS got bought, but they kind of went away. I think BAM. I know I left somebody else out. We've lost at least 7. Every one of those except IDOS went bankrupt, as in shut down, out of business. And it's a hard business, which means when you invest in this, you could actually lose money. I used to have a friend, I haven't talked to him in years, but he literally put his life savings in THQ at like 6. And I mean, honestly, this guy's life savings was something like $300,000, which is a lot of money, but it was like everything. If he lost that, he would never have been able to buy a home. He couldn't have retired, nothing. And he bought THQ at 6, so he had 50,000 shares, and he sold it at 33. So he made $1.5 million or $1.35 million. He made a ton. And 2 years later, THQ is worth 0. So the guy's timing was perfect, but had he stuck it out another 2 years, he would have lost his 300,000. God bless him. I mean, the guy has his 1-point-something million, and he actually bought a house and put some money away. He lived in North Carolina, so he probably bought a house for $500,000 or $600,000 and bought a nice one. But if you're irresponsible like that, that's dumb to put all your eggs in one basket. So I don't recommend anybody do that. The advice I give you is invest in a good mutual fund that has some gaming stocks in their portfolio. The Fidelity guys have a ton. T. Rowe Price has a ton. Putnam has a ton. I mean, there's a bunch of mutual funds. You can invest in Vanguard funds or index. They have them. So you'll have exposure, but I can't recommend that you buy any of these without knowing your financial situation. Okay, our last question this week is from Patreon, from Tom Duvac. Hey, Pac, not trying to turn you into an alarmist or anything, but I'm curious if you think there are any current industry trends that could ultimately become major long-term problem. I think that the publishers aren't really sure how to manage the trade-off between buying a game and selling you DLC and giving you free updates and doing microtransactions. And I actually think if there's any trend, it's the guys who are trying to make super high quality mobile games to give you like a full-fledged mobile experience, that could be a problem. I mean, that could cannibalize the console business. I think the trend that's not going to be a problem for any consumer, but will be for some of the people in the industry, is we just don't need that much processing power to play a game anymore. So notwithstanding all you Xbots out there who think that they need to have the Xbox One X, the most powerful console ever made, give it 5 years and that will be in a tablet, that'll be in a phone. I was talking to somebody today about the Amazon Echo Show, and it's got a TV screen. And if you look at the front of it, it says powered by Intel. And if you look at any video on the screen, it's got a pretty decent graphics card. Now, I don't think the show has a graphics card that compares to the Xbox One, and certainly not one that compares to the Xbox One X. But what about the 5th or 7th generation of the Echo Show? It's going to. And that thing's $199. Now, obviously you'd say, why would I buy an Echo Show when for $50 more or $79 more I can get an Xbox One? My answer will be because you want to put it next to your bed as your clock radio. And because you can say, Alexa, download PlayerUnknown Battleground, or Alexa, download FIFA. And then you start playing it on your TV because Amazon's going to figure that shit out. So there's a long-term trend that I think could be a problem for the industry, not for you. It's great for a consumer because if there's a device in your home that you otherwise are going to have anyway, and it can play a video game, it's bad for Sony, it's bad for Microsoft, it's great for Amazon, it's great for Apple because you know damn well they're going to make one of those devices. It's great for Google because you know they're going to make one. It's great for Activision and EA because honestly, look what happened to the movie studios, which is what Activision and EA are to games, when television was invented. When we suddenly had many other ways of watching a movie other than the theater, it was good for the movie studios. More money, they sold the movie many more places. Better for the actors, better for everybody in the environment, better for the consumer because now when a movie comes out, you can wait. And just today, I retweeted something from Nguy Kroll, solid dude, and it was a scene from a movie called Network, and that movie was Best Picture 1976, and one of my friends, Kevin Dent, tweeted back, WTF, that movie looks amazing, what is it? So I told him, and his next retweet tweeted immediately, downloading it on iTunes right now. So, whoever made that movie just got another $6 because Nguy tweeted a scene, which is really interesting, by the way, the Ned Beatty scene about the corporations run the world.
And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
And my friend Kevin Dent decided he thought that looked good and he wanted to see the movie. And I will check back with Kevin tomorrow and he will tell me that was a great movie. So the movie studios made a movie 41 years ago and they sold a copy today. That's awesome. That's what's going to happen to the games industry. And so, yes, you are going to get to play Spyro the Dragon and you are going to get to play every game you ever loved except Nintendo games because I think Nintendo will not embrace games playable anywhere on other people's devices. They want to control that, so they probably won't put their IP out there. But I think everybody else will. Thank you for joining us on this week's Pachter Factor. Again, if you're not a supporter on Patreon, you get early access to this for $2 a month. There are many other tiers that give you access to all sorts of great stuff. Shane has a show called Game Face. Actually, there's plenty of shows. Plenty of stuff to do on SIFTD and have the site curate all your content. If you can't afford that or choose not to spend the money, you're watching me on YouTube, that's cool, thank you. If you aren't paying anything, I insist that you follow me on Twitter @MichaelPachter because the least you can do is have me annoy you with my inane tweets. Thanks again for joining us, fellow babies. I'll see you next week.